In 1910, a bill was introduced to establish federal control of the manufacture and distribution of narcotic drugs, and the bill went nowhere. And the bill went nowhere because it was introduced by a Republican congressman named Foster from Vermont, and it was objected to because this was a substantial expansion of federal power into a new area. The Southern Democrats, who were extremely powerful in the Congress then, as they no longer are, but at that time this was the central part of the Democratic Party's political power in the Congress, in part because of their states' rights ideology that they had used to first fight the abolition of slavery and then to fight Yankee involvement in trying to advance the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments in the South. They did not, on principle, on their principle of states' rights, did not want more federal power into this area of drug and narcotic control. And the legislation simply died. The sponsors of the legislation looked at who their opponents were and developed a strategy to say, we need to make this a Negro problem. This has to be presented, this has to be, in contemporary terms, reframed as a problem of blacks. And when we reframe it that way, we will be able to overcome the objections of the Southern Democrats. And it happened that the Democrats took control as a result of the 1912 election. They took the White House. Woodrow Wilson was elected president, a native of Virginia. The Democrats took control of the House and the Senate. And the legislation was then reintroduced by, I forget, I apologize for not knowing, Harrison, whether he was whether he was a senator or a congressman, but the Harrison Narcotics Act was this former Foster bill now reintroduced. And because people were quite willing to explain their racial strategies in writing at the beginning of the 20th century in a way that they would not today, we have the historical record of what they had in mind. We have the historical record to say, we portray this as a problem of the lower class, shiftless blacks. That cocaine, in particular, was characterized as the principal cause of the rape of white women in the South. You have to understand that historically, racial fears that whites had of out-of-control blacks was the ingredient that got this unsuccessful legislation passed. It also has to be understood that this is in part a part of a broad national political racial dynamic that's taking place. W.E.B. Du Bois described the problem of race as the critical issue of the 20th century. Legally speaking, in one sense, the 20th century begins in 1896 with the Supreme Court decision of Plessy versus Ferguson, which holds that racial segregation is constitutional, notwithstanding the 14th Amendment. The early 20th century, as the children and grandchildren of the freed slaves are beginning to acquire education and economic power as tradesmen and shop owners and professionals, there is a white counter-reaction. The number of lynchings is increasing. The Ku Klux Klan is growing. The Ku Klux Klan was not a 19th century phenomenon. The Ku Klux Klan was a 20th century phenomenon, which reached its high watermark in the 1920s. That it is important to recognize that the Harrison Act and the way it's being portrayed was part of a white counter-reaction to maintain white privilege economically, socially, politically, in the face of the increased economic and social power that the freed slaves' descendants now had. And that, you have to understand that history to then look forward into the role in which drugs have played in the 1980s, 1990s, and even today.